Be sure to watch my TED Talk on londonreal.tv. All right, guys, let's do this, yeah?
Okay.
This is Silicon Reel, the video podcast dedicated to the people of the London technology startup scene. I'm Brian Rose. I also host London Reel, which is a similar format. There's three guys, usually guys, not always. It's a trialogue. We have people like UFC cage fighter Dan Hardy, the 4-Hour Workweek's Tim Ferriss, futurist Jason Silva, and drug smuggler Howard Marks have all been sitting in your chair, Hussein. My co-host today is entrepreneur Colin Pyle, who comes to London from Toronto. You've also taken some memorable motorcycle rides across China and India. You got one of them on Amazon right now, right?
Yeah, the China one, Middle Kingdom Ride, is the book and DVDs on Amazon.
Awesome.
Right now.
When is the India one coming out?
India run's pretty much finished. I just saw the final cut, so
good.
Yeah, so it's not bad. It's coming along. Yeah, okay. They still have all the graphics, which really adds to the show, right?
Yeah.
But we're hoping end of this year, early next year, it'll be out on Travel Channel again.
Awesome, yeah. Awesome. All right, we'll check that out. Also, the person here in spirit is Mr. Bryce Keane from the Three Beards. He's also part of this show. If you don't know who the Three Beards are, they host the Silicon Drinkabout, which we'll be going to right after this. It's every week. You get together with people of the London tech industry. It's a lot of fun. Everyone's got crazy ideas, and it's just a really cool vibe. So definitely check that out. Our guest today is Mr. Hussein Kanji, who is a partner at Hoxton Ventures, which, funny enough, is not in Hoxton, right?
Yes, ironically.
We'll talk about that later. It's a venture capital company that helps entrepreneurs disrupt existing industries and invent new ones. You were formerly a partner with Accel Partners.
Not a partner, an associate.
Sorry, an associate with Accel Partners. Got to be careful with that. Were you focused on consumer internet, financial technology, and software investments in companies like OpenGamma, Playfiish, and Dapper?
Yep.
Right? Okay. You got your MBA from London Business School, undergraduate from Stanford. My brother went there. They did not accept me at Stanford.
My dad went there, and I didn't even think to apply.
Really?
It is getting tougher and tougher.
It
got harder this year than Harvard. So
really?
Yeah, really. The lowest admissions rate, I think, in the U.S. now.
Is it?
Back when I went, it was not like that. It was much, much, much easier to get in.
I'm definitely not smart enough.
I'm from California, so I went up there, and I wasn't really feeling it, to be honest. Yeah. And my brother was already there, and I was like, fuck this, I'm not going there. So I went to MIT on the East Coast instead. But yeah, anyways, no issues with Stanford.
Where my sister went, so.
Oh, okay. Oh, really? Oh,
yeah,
really?
MIT.
Oh, nice.
Course 6.
Course 6. Yeah. Was she double E or computer science?
Course 6, double E with bio.
Okay, nice.
Yeah, there's like a 6 point something. I don't get the MIT numbering
Yeah,
system.
I mean, when you're at MIT, you know, every major has a number.
Yeah.
Really?
That makes sense, yeah. So I was course 2, which was mechanical engineering. Course 6 is computer science.
10 is like brain science.
Yeah.
But like you refer to
so
all
the
of these
higher
things.
number, the harder like the...
No, because
No,
15 is management, which is the Sloan School of Management, which everyone thinks is a joke there. No offense.
Management's always a joke at every school, right?
Yeah.
It's a great business degree, but as an undergrad, does it get respect?
No, we used to call industrial engineering imaginary engineering, which I think is, like, if you Google it, that's what almost everybody calls it. So
Yeah, I think Disney had the first Imagineers were probably industrial engineers. Yeah, so we're going to get some hate on that one. But yeah, that's MIT for you. I could go on and on. What was I going to say? You spent time between London and San Francisco,
which
that's bi-coastal.
Yeah.
You know, Paris Hilton says she's bi-coastal, but she's got
but I live here, so I moved here 8 years ago.
Okay,
So.
all right, very good. You, among your accolades, apparently you built Apple's first website. That's pretty cool.
Way back in the day.
Okay, that's good. Anyways, enough about that. Welcome to Silicon Reel. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome, awesome. There's there's tons of video of you out there talking to everything from youngsters to Bloomberg to old people. But I listened to you say one thing, and you said since about 1985, only 12 to 5 companies a year turn out to be like those billion-dollar success stories. And I think you broke it down and said like half were in China and a third were in Europe. And I was just wondering, I guess it's ultimately your job to find those companies. And being in the UK, since we're not in China, we're not in America, How do you do that?
So that's the hard part. So it's about 12 to 15, and there have been a bunch of studies on this. So there's one done at Stanford by one of the folks who's now a partner at Floodgate. There's one done by Benchmark, which is one of the big venture firms on the West Coast. I think there's another study done by August, and all of them, almost all the studies, same numbers. They all did their own analysis, 12 to 15 a year. Most of them in the 80s sat in the U.S. In the 90s, there was a little bit of a transition to China, so about a third of them would sit in China. And today, probably a third are sitting in China. China's gone from like no people on the internet to 300 million people, and there'll probably be 1 billion people on the internet, which is what drives most of the Chinese software growth.
I would have never guessed like 12 to 15. Like number one wouldn't have come to my head.
So the weird thing is that 12 to 15 stays stable. So despite the dot-com bubble, 12 to 15. Maybe it goes up a little bit, but it basically stays the same. And if you look, it's hard to do statistically, so you have to kind of do it anecdotally, although you can try and do it statistically. You look back and you see what creates these 12 or 15 companies. The vast majority of them are companies that were created in the bulk, in the wave of a new market creation. So what's a new market creation? Something happens, the internet pops up, and you can now do certain things that you could do that you couldn't do before, and new companies get formed, and oftentimes new categories get formed. So a very good example is, there are a bunch of people who believed the web was going to go mobile back in 2000, 2001, 2002, 2003. Most of those guys all failed because they were a little bit too early. 2005, 2006, if you made that bet, and then the iPhone came out in 2006, 2007, you could have written an exponential curve, and that creates billion-dollar companies. The big company in that space was AdMob, but if you look at AdMob, its competitor was Quattro, which got bought by Apple for $400 million. AdMob got bought by Google for $750. The number 3 company is an Indian company. It's called InMobi. Doesn't look like an Indian company, feels much more like a global company, and that's, people estimate that to be a billion-dollar company. So, number 1, number 2, number 3, all real winners. Social gaming, same exact thing. Facebook releases an API. All of a sudden, you can build stuff on top of Facebook. Couldn't do that before. There wasn't a platform like this before, and the platform wasn't open. Facebook opens it up. A bunch of entrepreneurs decide that they're going to be able to build apps on top of this. Some of the apps are greeting cards. Some of the apps are birthday applications. A bunch of lightweight, fun applications. And then a couple of people decide that you can build video games on top of this. The biggest is, of course, Zynga. Playfiish comes up with the same thing. The number 3 company in the space, Playdom, gets it completely wrong. Right? They decide to build on top of the MySpace API. Remember MySpace? But all three of all 3 of the companies end up becoming really large companies. So Playfiish gets acquired for $375. Zynga goes public, north of a $2 billion valuation. I think they got up to 4 at one point. And then the Playdom one, which is the most interesting one, so it completely gets it wrong, right? MySpace, $750 million takeout. So, all 3 companies end up succeeding. So it's new market creation. So there are shifts in our industry that happen. And I guess part of being a venture guy is figuring out where those shifts are going to be, anticipate them. You have to kind of invest pre-shift or into the shift, which means you have almost no clarity whatsoever into the, and a lot of these shifts are they're going to kind of expire, right? You're not going to be able to make that much money on them because the shifts don't actually happen. You could have invested in the mobile web in 2003, 2004. You would have had the direction right, but you would have had the timing wrong. So part of your job is getting the timing right, and a lot of it's luck at the end of the day. But these shifts tend to build really, really large companies. And because there are not that many shifts every year, there are not that many companies that get to those kinds of stages. And then, that number is, like I said, consistent. Europe is now producing about one a year, pretty much regularly. We can probably hopefully get to 2 a year, but we're still at the 1 a year stage.
What were the last 5 in Europe?
So let's see, what are the big ones? So Wonga is a big one. Doing kind of real. Their tech is real-time credit scoring, taking in a bunch of signals. Like one of Wonga's big signals is looking at cell phone data. So they figure out, folks who are not able to really pay anything. These are folks who are, lower middle class who are cash strapped and, don't actually have that much money, which is why they're going to Wonga for a loan. What they look at is folks who end up paying their cell phone bills, and these are all postpaid customers. These are not folks who have, credit accounts with the carriers. Folks who have enough cash to pay their cell phone bill and keep the cell phone bill alive, probably enough cash to service debt. And so that's one of the signals that Wonga uses. You couldn't historically, you historically go to Experian or TransUnion, you look at your mortgage, you look at other signals. This idea of taking cell phone signals was a new signal, and the amount of computation that you need to do to be able to do this is also new. So Wonga is one of them.
How big's Wonga? They're not public, but what would you reckon market cap-wise?
A billion pounds plus. Their last valuation was 800 million. Okay. So, and that was, ironically, the guys who backed them were Welcome. I don't know if you guys know Welcome.
Yeah, like the Welcome Trust.
The Welcome Trust, the biggest charitable trust in the United Kingdom.
They have an investment arm, and that's what they...
Exactly.
Wasn't there some pasture or something in
Yeah, there's
Wonga
been a
like
bunch of
crazy.
friction and controversy around
sure.
Wonga.
Is that what you call bad press? Friction?
Yeah,
Man, it's a good VC
No
term.
press is bad press. I think that's
Yeah, well, I'm just curious. If Wonga was in your portfolio, would you sleep at night? Would you be happy with that?
So we used to have this litmus test at Accel. So our test was, imagine the Wall Street Journal decides to
Yeah.
write about you, and they have the
And
little
your mother
pin.
sees it.
Well, not even your mother. You have that little image because the Wall Street
yeah.
Journal has like its distinctive little image, right?
Always wanted
Imagine
one of
that's
those.
your picture on the front page.
Right.
I'm not so sure I could sleep back.
Really?
I mean, Wonga's a great company. I mean, all respect to Errol for building something that big, but I'm not so sure. And to me, especially as a Muslim guy, where I don't do usury is a hard. Usually is often a soft line, but I think when you're charging 4,000, 5,000% APR,
Yeah.
I think you're firmly in the usurer's bucket. Now, the counter argument to this, to make it fair for the Wonga guys, right, is they say, look, these are folks who nobody's going to loan to. The loans are not rolling; they're only 2 weeks. So and if you default on that, they obviously try and collect, but it's not like the interest piles up, and you can think of it as almost like a service fee versus an interest rate. That's the positive. But 4,000, 5,000%. I mean, I personally think this is a business that should be regulated, right? And the only reason why it really exists is because it's not a regulated market. In the U.S., it's a regulated market, which is why you don't have the Wongas of the world.
Really,
out in
that
the
couldn't
US.
exist in the U.S.?
No, it's all regulated by the folks who. I mean, you can't charge 4,000%.
Does the U.S. have a cap? Is usury considered like 20% above or something?
Yeah,
like
they
that?
have some kind of cap. I don't know what the I don't know.
always
what the-
hated that word usury. We're providing the service.
Yeah, well, that's the Wonga argument. But Wonga's one. But same kind of meme. Just taking real credit data and figuring it out. Klarna's another one in Sweden. So Klarna is very similar to an American company called Bill Me Later. So in the continent, not a lot of people have credit cards, and not a lot of people pay for goods and services with credit cards. They're much more used to paying with bank accounts. This is a different phenomenon if you come from the U.S. and the further you go into the continent, the more it's debit card, more bank card.
Okay.
And the problem is if you buy something with a bank card, your return policy, you got to trust the merchant, right, to be able to return the goods, and you're paying for the goods up front. It's not like you can call American Express and say, these jokers didn't send me something.
Right, because credit cards kind of give you an implicit guarantee,
Right.
and they'll tell the vendor to give you your money back.
Exactly,
Okay, right.
exactly.
But the bank won't fight for you that way.
The bank won't. Well, what banks really fight for you if something happens? I mean, that's a nice pipe dream. So Klarna, Klarna's big thesis was, can you build a model where you can bill the person later? You send them the goods. Now, obviously, if you're going to send someone the goods and not take payment, the fraud risk is really, really quite high. So they have this, and it's all computer science guys at Klarna. It's interesting. There's this parallel computation. There's a switching technology that came out of Ericsson to switch a bunch of network processors out there, which are switching your internet traffic. They built a parallel computing engine, and there's a language for this called Erlang. It's a derivative of Lisp, and they use this technology to make real-time credit decisions to figure out if someone qualifies for sending them a product and figuring if they're going to be able to pay for it and will pay for it. And that company's done really well. Sequoia ended up backing them as a growth round. That's another interesting company in Europe. Probably the most interesting company right now in Europe is Supercell. Which started off about 2 years ago. They have two games, Clash of Clans and Heyday. Actually, both of them mobile gaming companies in the world. The market leaders are European. They're both Finnish.
Why is that?
In Helsinki. Digital studios in Helsinki, plus mobile talent. It's hard. I mean, Angry Birds was the first, right? So Angry Birds, and the last time I checked, they had 50 million concurrent active users playing their game at the same time, and I think there's something like several hundred million people who've installed the app.
Right.
Huge numbers.
Is that Sweden as well?
Helsinki? No, not Sweden.
Helsinki.
Finland.
Okay.
And then the other company is Supercell, which built this game called Clash of Clans, which about 6-7 months ago is probably doing about $1.5 million a day in revenue. About a year ago, it was doing about $1 million a day, and today is doing about $2 million a day.
Is that like App Store cash in the bank?
$2 million, yeah, coming in every single day, and it's all basically. And I don't know if you have kids or if you hang out with kids, but their target audience is kids, and they create a clan, they get their friends to come be their clan members, and the game is so well engineered mechanically to force you can level up. But it's going to take you a really long time. So, the kids are basically going back to their parents and saying, give me the credit card, give me the app store. And I was with a friend last week, And I forgot this, but on the App Store, if you put in your password, for about an hour, the password stays stagnant. It doesn't time out.
Right.
So if the kid gets the password for the next hour, they can kind of spend as freely as they want if you haven't turned up that setting. So this particular kid, I think, he spent 300 pounds in the course of an hour on his Clash of Clans game. That's part of the $2 million a day that Supercell's getting.
That's the freemium model, right? That's what everyone wants to be a part of.
Yeah, item sales. I mean, we noticed that at Playfiish as well. At Playfiish, when we turned off all the advertising, when we funded the company, first of all, we didn't even know if games on Facebook would work, right?
Right. You said you spent like a year trying to convince people that people would play games on top of
yeah,
Facebook
like the entrepreneurs behind Playfiish were super bright. Chris came in and gave this big thesis of why the gaming market was moving. We'd done this internal homework at Accel saying console games are kind of that's last year's stuff, right? And that there's going to be something that replaces them. We had no clue as investors what would replace them. We could see that there were massively multiplayer online games. We could see that there was good stuff happening in the online space, but we didn't really know what was going to be the next wave. And then here comes Chris saying Facebook just opens up his API. I think I can build. At that point, Facebook had 400 million users. I have 400 million users I can market to. But I remember when I wrote the investment memo, we didn't know if you were going to be able to charge a subscription service. We didn't know if this was going to be ad-supported games. We didn't know if you were going to pay for levels. And then what the Playfiish guys found out by shipping a product and then testing a whole bunch of stuff, they found that if you turned off everything else except for the item sales, so you force people to upgrade their character by spending money on their player, conversion rate, everything maxed out. That was the point on the curve economically where you maximize.
So
revenue.
no ads, no other stuff.
Yeah, turn all that other stuff, all the other stuff. Your conversion rate goes up, everything goes up, and you maximize your economic yield. And that's basically what they did. And then Zynga guys took it even a concept further. And there were, it was funny if you ever talk to Mark Pincus. He will tell you, a friend of mine had sent him a couple of, one of his early buddies, and I don't think he was an angel investor, but sent him a couple of resumes of top-notch game designers, right? Guys who had really creative DNA, perfect product managers. And Pincus said, I don't want to talk to these guys. I want quants. I want ex-Goldman, ex-analysts, people who know how to run a spreadsheet. These monkeys don't know how to run a spreadsheet. I don't want to hire them. I don't care how good they are at the design or the building of a game. That's not what he was looking for.
Number crunchers.
Just number crunchers. It was maximizing yield, right, inside of these games, and it turned out it was all item sales, and that's what happened. And, Zynga's kind of had its ups and downs, right, and especially in the last few months because their games have slowed down, and they haven't made the transition to mobile. But this entire industry, the social games industry, no one. There was a very popular blog back in the day that one of the venture guys, I won't name him, used to run. And I remember talking to him about the Playfiish investment, and he just looked at me really funny. He was like, I don't think anyone's going to play video games on top of Facebook. I think the apps on top of Facebook, when we made the investment, were all, the Slide was the big company. There were going to be lightweight, fun applications that you were going to play with your friends. They weren't, play is even the wrong word, that you were going to kind of share with your friends. They were going to be greeting card things, and Slide turned out to get acquired by Google. So all of these things actually, these new market shifts are huge, right? Because when there's a new market shift, nobody knows what's going to happen. And if you happen to catch the market shift right, maybe you turn into $1 billion company. If you happen to catch it wrong, even the incumbents, even the incumbents don't know, and they acquire you, right? Which is what happened with Slide. So it's an interesting place to invest. We're looking to see, at least as a fund, what's going on in Europe. Are there folks out here catching the same trends as they are? And the trends are global these days, right? And can they position themselves to catch the trend and turn into the next $1 billion company?
Do you have a question?
Yeah, well, just what are you guys anticipating as the next trend, or what are you investing in now?
So it's hard, right? So part of this job is an extreme amount of humility, because none of us really know what the future holds. All we can do is we can do a little bit of homework to figure out where the shifts are changing. So one big shift for us that we see is this whole idea of kind of quantified self or health. Now, not regulated. So I'm not talking about healthcare or medical stuff. I'm talking about the things like Runkeeper or Fitbit, or Nike has a product, Jawbone Up. This is a new market. I have no idea what it's going to look like 10 years from now. But the idea of being able to measure things that are going on in your body, inside or outside, connect them over to a device that processes it or cloud that processes it and gives you information and tells you what to do, is an interesting space, and they're clear. I mean, clearly the early successes are all related to running and fitness and being able to track your steps, etc. But I think this is at the beginning of the wave, right? I think as we get more and more technology, we'll be able to do more and more interesting things. We actually backed a company in Berlin that we're excited about, but again, we have no idea if it's gonna. With all of our investments, we never know what the future really looks like. But they're building a sensor that accurately measures hormone levels in your saliva. So, to be able to measure hormones today, you have to be able to draw blood. Right. And blood is, you have to pull it out, you have to send it to a lab, it's all regulated. If you can build a consumer at-home device for a couple of $100 or a few $100 that can measure this kind of stuff, in real time and give you all kinds of data. Well, again, we have no idea what the insight's going to look like. We know what the insight's going to be. We have no idea what people are going to do with it, but it's an interesting new market. Our job most of the time is listening to people who see these trends before us, anticipating the trends, and then trying to figure out, is the timing right? Is the set of so that set of attributes that people are coming to us correct or good enough to be able to go build something really big.
So it's really qualitative. It's a really subjective view. I mean, you're not really throwing darts at a board. You're not betting on a product or a specific revenue of a market. You're trying to...
So us as a fund, I mean, the different venture guys take a very different attitude to this, but for us, like we're pretty much in the 100% market camp, which is we're looking for new changing markets where, again, the entrepreneurs come in, and we've backed entrepreneurs literally, sheet of paper, 2 people, the new investment that we're doing, we're waiting for the company to get incorporated. Hopefully on Monday they get incorporated so we can give them the term sheet, because we can't even give them a term sheet until the company's incorporated, so we can actually start the process and give them their money. But, 2 bright guys, they've identified a market that's shifting. It's a new market. We think they're best in class in terms of their talent. We look a lot at not just the market, but also who they're recruiting. Our biggest sign for whether a company is going to succeed or not is who they're able to recruit as their first handful of employees. If they're able to recruit best in class, guys who they really shouldn't be able to recruit, who shouldn't quit their jobs and kind of join these guys, right? And oftentimes most of the people we back are first-time guys and they're young. It's just kind of nature of our industry. But if they can go attract, a world expert in something to quit and join, that's a pretty good sign they're going to be able to do that consistently over the next decade.
So that actually, it's called social proof. So that that impresses you when they can get guys to leave industries to come to their company.
Yeah. If you can hire world-class people around you and you're sitting on top of this new market, you're probably pretty well catalyzed to be able to go build something great. And again, we're venture guys, right? So most of the stuff that we invest in is going to fail, and the reason why we're so focused on these new market stuff is when we don't fail, those things can turn out to be really big, and they kind of outweigh all the losses for us.
You said that you want people to hire better than yourself.
Yeah, that's our second criteria. Well, we found that that's been pretty consistent. Like the guys who are exceptionally good are able to hire people who are just as good, if not better, than themselves. And you look at like the early composition of Google. The 2 guys who started Google, Larry and Sergey, are exceptionally bright. But then you look at the people who they put around themselves. They recruited a professor out of Stanford, Peter Norvig, to come in. He was like a world expert in AI. He taught my AI class. You don't get people like this quitting a tenured job to come and join a company if you yourself are not really impressive, right? And Peter was a different level. Peter's still the head of research, or he's got a senior engineering title at Google, but world-class guy to come and join. And being young, being first time, being new in the industry, hitting at that level is a really good sign that you're building something great.
That's a good point.
Again, the people come back is a constant theme on this show.
Absolutely.
The people are like you're investing in the people ultimately. Yeah, of course the idea and you want a new market, but everyone's saying 90% is the people.
Yeah. And for us, most of the time when there's a new market, it's more than one person trying to capitalize on it.
Right.
Not everybody sees it. A lot of people see the market after the market's actually clear, and then a bunch of money rushes in. I don't know how much money rushed into the social game space about a year or 2 after we invested in Playfiish and Zynga was already funded, because people understood that social games are a real market, and you can build great companies. King.com is one of these companies. It's a European company, and those guys have just been execution machines, but then you're backing execution. When you're backing the early part of it, you're backing the market creation and the exponential growth, and the market forgives most of the mistakes because you get this exponential growth. Nobody knows what the hell they're doing, and the growth kind of carries you up. But the better the people that you've been able to recruit, the more you can capitalize on that growth, right? You hire weak people, you'll rise up, but you'll rise up a lot slower. So.
Are there times where you see the similar idea but pitched by different groups of guys?
Oh, yeah, all the time.
Really?
We probably see it less here than we do in California. In California, you have the luxury of sitting back and you'll see like 10, 15 guys all basically, and that's when the light bulb should go off, right? Saying, I think there's a new market here, because like 10 different people pitch me the same thing, and then in the course of like a month or two, and you can kind of spot the market almost. So you do a little bit of work up front to figure out where the kind of tides are shifting, and then you listen. And in the listening process, you learn a lot about the market. So,
do you make the decision about those guys like in the first 2 minutes when you meet them? I mean, like, well, you had to make
first impressions, everything.
Yeah, I mean,
impressions do count for something, but at the same time, the guys that we end up backing, again, because we skew young and technical and first-time founders. We had a founder who had never pitched. It was his first business. He was 30, maybe 29, 30 at the time, and had never pitched a business before, and came in, did the investment committee and literally read off of his slides. This was probably the worst presentation I've ever seen in my life. He was wooden. He read off the slides. When we asked him hard questions, he got really nervous, and his answers were short, and they probably weren't very complete. And then he spoke in a Southern accent. So Southerners speak kind of slow. So he didn't come across very well. Fast forward, we ended up backing him anyway. We knew that we'd spent a bunch of time working with him in a much more casual setting, where we literally stood around his office, hung out in his conference room. We actually wrote a business plan together with him, because he had bootstrapped a business. He was selling industrial supplies products. He stuck up a website. His website used to take literally like 40 seconds to load. This was a terrible website. And he did 3,000 pounds the first month, 10,000 pounds the next month, 20,000 pounds a month after. There was clearly something that he tapped, and nobody sells industrial supplies products in Europe and in Africa and the Middle East. And he had people like the Qatar Air Force military base was buying stuff, and they found him on Google. So there was something here. There was a gem here. He was a good guy, came from the industry. He needed some help. He needed some support. He needed to find the right CTO, build a team around him, which we could help. And fast forward a year, and he's running around talking to investors today, and he charms the hell out of them.
Smooth operator.
The problem was he'd never done it before, right? So if you just judged him on that first impression of how he pitched, you would have just dismissed him at that point, right? But he had a good idea. He had some early market traction, and our industry is all about believing in future outcomes. You can't just look at what people are doing today. You have to project and figure out what they're going to be in 10 years, right? It's really easy to read about all the greats in our industry and like how great they are today, but you got to look at them like when they first started, right? When they first started, you have to look forward.
When Steve Jobs was soaking his bare feet in toilets.
Exactly.
Stuff,
I mean, could you have predicted that he was going to be that much of an iconic person in our industry, right? So, and the truth is, we often don't know, but there's signs, right? And again, for us, and Jobs fits this as well. Look at his first employee. His first employee was Woz, right? His co-founder. He convinced a guy who's actually a world-class engineer, because Steve Jobs is not a world-class engineer, right? Convinced this guy to kind of work for him and quit his job. I forget where Woz was working at the time. I don't think it was at Atari or HP or something like that. And got him to like leave, right? And go join this company and start the company.
In the garage, yeah.
Exactly. So
it's weird because like the guys that have those game-changing ideas and that passion and that drive are probably a little introverted and a little crazy. Yeah, and they probably don't give the slickest presentation. And I wonder if that's a warning sign sometimes when some guy gets up who's extroverted and polished and has all the hockey stick projections, and you're like, this is too smooth.
Yeah, I mean, it takes all kinds, and I think in different kinds of markets, like in the enterprise software market where sales is so important, the guys are much more slick oftentimes. But yeah, you look at the new markets, and there are definitely changes in the enterprise software market as well, right? Because there are new shifts in that market as well. Like when Salesforce came around, that was a new shift. It was a very easy shift. It was going from like the Siebel old school, $1 million plus implementations to something that was browser-based, much lightweight. But the guy running it was Mark Benioff, and he was a sales guy at Oracle, and was very polished, right? So you do see guys like that, but at the same time, you see guys who are like two kids in a garage, right? The classic Stanford or MIT story, and again, you have to look forward. You have to see if they have the core ingredients to build something that can be really big. And as much as we back people and we believe in the people, we also believe that the markets also turn these people great. Sometimes just being in the right place at the right time with the right idea and the right backing will lead you to be one of these guys. And, people develop, the smart people develop really fast and really rapidly. And you can almost watch their transformation as they're running the business, right? So they may be like grad students one day, but the next day, they're on the cover of one of the magazines, and, they're very slick and very, very, very different. And you can watch the evolution kind of over the few years. If you're lucky enough to back people like that.
That's exciting to kind of watch that whole thing happen. Yeah. What can you tell us about Hoxton Ventures? As far as why aren't you in Hoxton? That's one of them. Because we are, I guess.
We can't afford it.
We can't afford it. Oh,
it's too expensive.
We can barely afford it. How big are you? What's your typical investment? How many do you make a year? Just and roughly breakdown of different industries you're in.
Yeah. So we set up. We started fundraising a couple of years ago. It took us a long time. So the amount of malaise there is in the European economy for venture is so bad. It made life really difficult for us because there are all these people who've been trying to do investments in Europe before us, and not as many of them have succeeded. Some of them have, but not enough. So most of the money that goes to people like us has been turned off. So it makes it really difficult to go raise a new fund, and you put yourself in the brash, young, new category. I'm 36, but people tell me I don't look 36. I probably skew a little bit younger. Yeah. And so you're going off talking to institutional investors, and they're like, "Who the hell is this kid?" Asking me for money in a place where people don't really make money. So people have dismissed European venture.
And Europe haven't had the big exits,
which I think is unfair. I mean, I think historically, if you look back again, 25 years ago. And you were, apart from the semiconductor industry, which is very global, and that's where actually a lot of the success in the European industry has been. But if you look at the software industry, good guy, you're going to build a company here. Likely chances there's an American who's got the same idea, who's going to get 3 times as much money and then has a market 6 times bigger than you. And by the time you're ready to expand, he's ready to expand. So you both go into France and they're both going to Germany. And you can kind of play out the movie, and it's very easy to see how the ending works. The guy who wins is usually the Americans, and the edge case is the European. And you don't see very many great European software businesses as a result relative to the Americans. But 5 years ago or 7 years ago, you had Facebook. And you had the App Store. So for the first time ever, you could go global as a software business and get distribution. It's not surprising nowadays that the mobile games companies, the 2 best games, are in Finland, right? Helsinki is a 500,000 person town. It is tiny.
But super mobile, right?
But super mobile.
Finns have been mobile for a long time.
Great talent, and almost all their users are outside of Finland, right? So they figured out how to go outside the country, and then it's become really easy for them because going outside the country means putting a great game on top of the App Store on Google Play. And you get, or Google, Google what is Google's
App Store? I don't know.
Google's App Store called. It used to be called the Android Marketplace, but I think it's called Google Play now. But you drop down on those things, and all of a sudden you've got a billion people that you can kind of target, who've got those devices. So you can go global, but all of that's changed in the last 5 or 7 years. So if you're an investor who's normally giving to venture funds, you typically look in the rears. You look at fund performance, you look at how the funds do, and then you make a speculative bet on how the funds are going to do in the future based on how they did in the past. Unfortunately, all of these changes happened over the last few years, so we haven't seen all that many catalysts for great venture returns in Europe because the companies are new in this sense, and the funds that are backing them, the companies aren't mature enough to see all the results. So for us, it was a tough process, but we convinced enough people to give us money. It just took us a really long time. The reason why we're in Mayfair, which is where we are, right at the top of Berkeley Square.
Which, if you're not a Londoner, is the posh part of town.
Yeah,
it's where all the hedge funds are. Yeah. It's where, To
be fair, Balderton's up the street from us. Accel is down the street from us, and Nix is like on just a little bit east of us. So
and
we're
the Bentley dealership is right across the.
Well, the Porsche dealership is right next door to us. The Oscar de la Renta is right across the street. No, the reason why we're there is because one of our investors owns a building there, and he gave us the building effectively. We have the 3rd floor, and I remember one of our investors came in and he said, one of the hallmarks of a good startup is they're scrappy and they're able to convince people to give them stuff at no cost, and so he was like, "Look at you guys! Like you have like a super posh office, and we have a beautiful office. I mean, it's really nice. But we basically don't pay rent. I mean, it's basically one of our investors' generosity that keeps us there, which is why we're in Mayfair. If we weren't in Mayfair, we would probably be in Clerkenwell, maybe Fitzrovia. Being in Shoreditch or Hoxton is a little bit too east. And then the question is, why do we call ourselves Hoxton Ventures? Yeah. So, like all startups, we could not figure out what to call ourselves, so we went through every single variant and eventually found that Hoxton. I wanted to call it, and Rob hates this story, Rob's my business partner, I wanted to call it the Gray Squirrel Investment Company. So I don't know if you know.
Squirrel Investment. Okay.
Yeah, there's got to be a good story here.
Yeah.
So in England, they're red squirrels and they're gray squirrels. The gray squirrels are American, the red squirrels are British. The gray squirrels cannot mate with the red squirrel. However, the gray squirrels have no problems chatting up the red squirrels, and they effectively block the red squirrels from doing their thing. The gray squirrels also, like if there's a big open plain, the red squirrels are scared. They don't cross it. They stay where they are. The gray squirrel has no problems, goes right across them, which is why they've expanded. And there are all these societies in England. You can Google this. The New York Times wrote a wonderful piece a few years ago called like the Squirrel Wars. Yeah, it's like an 8-page article called the Squirrel Wars, and it's all about how like English, like the red squirrel is like it's cuter than the gray squirrel. So there are all these like red squirrel conservation societies, and they want to get rid of the gray squirrel as like a pest, like from America. And back at Stanford, we used to have the black squirrel, which we all used to say came out of some like lab. And the black squirrel's taken over all the gray squirrels, at least on the Stanford campus. But we figured like this is kind of tongue in cheek. We're both Americans. We're in Europe.
A lot of connotations to that name.
but that name was vetoed. So okay. We ended up picking Hoxton because it sounded like a good, nice, easy name, and it's kind of within the meme, right? Which is there's a bunch of stuff happening in East London, and that is in many ways kind of the future of the tech economy. But then, ironically, like I said, we ended up in Mayfair because we have cheap rent.
Well, that's important. So, okay, and roughly what kind of capital are you looking to contribute to each company? How many in your portfolio? How many a year? I just try to get an idea of scale.
So when we first started, we thought we'd invest kind of between the $500,000 to $2 million range. Again, we think in terms of dollars because most of the things that we end up selling will be to American companies or go public in America.
Are your investors in dollars as well?
So all of our we invest in wherever the company is. So we'll convert, but we tend to think of the fund as just a dollar-based fund versus anything. We're a dollar-based fund. Okay. So when we first started, we thought $500,000 to $2 million. There's a bunch of money available in the UK from an EIS perspective or from a seed perspective. There's not a lot of money at the Series A, not as much money in the Series B. We're too poor to do Series B, and Series A is kind of where we saw the biggest gap. And so $500,000 to $2 million is where we kind of want it to be. Within a few months of doing this, we realized that we were wrong. So we thought the average check would probably be about $1 million, maybe sub $1 million. It's too little money. If you're going to try and build a company, you need more money than this, and we learned this by working with entrepreneurs. And several times we ended up having arguments with entrepreneurs saying, you're asking for X. We've run our own calculations. We actually think you need a lot more than X.
Like 3X?
Right. Usually 2X. Okay. So like in the case of Leicester, they were asking for £500,000. We ran our numbers and we're like, you need $1 million to start with, which is like $1.5 million. And we end up in these conversations where like, we don't want the $1 million. We want the $500,000. We're like, look, we don't mind the valuation. We'll just reset the valuation so you have the same amount of ownership and we have the same amount of ownership. It's just a different size check. Sometimes that's too much responsibility for folks. So we've had these awkward conversations. And we've basically settled on our average check is now between $1.5 million and $2 million. So that's, if you're going to try and build one of these world-changing companies, you just need that amount of capital to even get a start. And sometimes the rounds are slightly bigger than that as well, where some other co-investors come in alongside of us. And as far as deals, again, because we're so focused on these new market shifts, we don't think there's a ton of them. So we try and do one deal maybe every 2 to 3 months. We have no formula for this, right? So we can do one deal every 2 weeks if we felt like it, if we see the amount of companies that we see, but roughly 1 to maybe 2 a quarter is what we're seeing right now. And, we want to have enough bets in the portfolio, enough bets on new markets where, we can run effectively a fund strategy. To be able to, hopefully. And we've been lucky. Most of the investments that we made have all, with the exception of one thing, which I had at Accel, none of them have gone to zero, with the exception of one. So they've all actually turned out to be decent outcomes.
And is it like similar VC percentages? Do you usually take like between 20-25% of the company?
Yeah,
or
somewhere between 15 to 30 is kind of our number.
Okay. And you'll be the first investor, or like you said, you're more like the Series A guy, but it sounds like 2 guys on a piece of paper is almost angel-ish.
We've done everything. So, we're more like a Series A fund. We really do want to see evidence of, some kind of product market fit. These days it's so cheap to build the prototype. You can get some, there's other people's money, seed money, angel money, et cetera. But, if we have conviction that there's a new market and these are the right guys. So, you know, when the Leicester folks came, there were one was ex-Playfish, one was another VC. We knew that they could execute. The model that they were doing was already established at Fab. They were basically doing the European version. They were only a handful, like 3-4 months after Fab, but it was an execution play, and you know we can take execution risk, right? It wasn't concept risk. So, you know, we were very, very happy to fund them off of a sheet of paper. The one that we're doing right now, again, we understand the market. They're experts in this space. You know, the product might not work, but it's one of these things where it's very technically dependent, and so you just need to give them they can't go raise angel money to go build a prototype. They've got to build a real product, and so again, we're very happy to make that kind of investment. For other things where it's a consumer service, especially where these days it's very easy to go test assumptions in the consumer space. And one thing I've realized as a venture guy is our judgment in consumer internet companies or consumer mobile companies is basically nil. None of us really know how these things are going to work. So you almost have to build and ship a product and see how it reacts, because it's impossible to figure out Instagram is going to become Instagram or Snapchat's going to become Snapchat. It's just too hard. Even Instagram, if you look at Andreessen Horowitz, which is a phenomenally great firm, you know, they passed on the Instagram. They seed funded Instagram and they funded a competitor, and they believed more in the competitor. I think it was PicPlease than they believed in Instagram, and you know that was clearly not the right bet. It's just too hard. So you end up having to see data. So for those kinds of businesses, there's a slightly higher burden. We want to see them have and especially because it's not that expensive to build a product. So we want to see them, you know, introduce something into the market and show us the early bit of data.
But you won't give them the 50K or 100K to get that product. You kind of want them to do that on their own.
Yeah, yeah. And there's other money out there for that stuff. So we try and be the scale investors. So again, we can be very early in the scale part, but you know we want our money to accelerate growth more than anything.
Where do you find your companies generally? Do they come to you, or like how do you find this guy with an idea and they're not even incorporated?
Yeah, so we just did an internal bit of work to figure out where our companies are coming from. So we get, you know, we chase after stuff that we hear about because you know that is part of our job. We go to conferences, etc., and we meet people there. But virtually every single investment that we've made, I actually think every single investment that we've made has been inbound from the entrepreneurs. So they have figured out that they want to work with us. Maybe we're one of a handful of people that they want to work with, and they've come and talked to us, and we've convinced them that they should take our money.
Wow. Do you do PR?
Well, we end up in things, but we don't have a PR firm. You know, we don't actively look for press. You know, but you know, when people want comments on things, you know, we're very happy to contribute. So.
And are you always looking for money? Are you always raising money, or is that something you have enough money now? Or
we're done, thank goodness. We were in that. Well, it's the same bucket as an entrepreneur, except you know, unlike an entrepreneur, where you can actually take a little bit of money, prove something, come back for some more money. You know, you're kind of you hold out the bag and say trust me, I'll give you your money back in 10 years, and I'm really good at my job. And there's no proof that you have whatsoever. So we're past that phase. Our next phase for funds usually raise on a 3-year cycle. So in about 2.5 years, we'll be back on the road again. Hopefully this time with a portfolio, unlike before. Actually, what we realized is we were going through this, showing people evidence that you can actually do what you say you're going to do, even at a small scale, is just as important in the investment business. So what we started doing is took all of our savings, which wasn't a lot, but we took all of our savings, all of our outcomes, and we're basically surviving. We had no salary for 3.5 years. So we took all of our savings to basically fund ourselves. But then we said, you know what? We had an early exit. We said, let's just take all the proceeds, and you know what? Screw it. We're going to prove to people that we're actually good investors, and we started investing. And we started investing, and some of our investors came alongside of our investments, and that's how we did the first handful of deals. And that made a difference, because we had 2 exits in this basically 1.5 years, and people said, hey, maybe these guys they might be young, they might still be unproven, but they've got instincts, they're seeing stuff, and that made it a lot easier to fundraise for.
Because you used your own money in the fund.
Yeah. Well, this wasn't in the fund. We were doing it as like a special purpose vehicle. So we're taking our money, pooling it, putting it into a company, holding it directly. So we did Go Cardless this way. We did Luster this way. What else? We did Tesoro this way. And then people said, these guys will be able to trust them with giving them money and putting it into a fund and getting the fund off the ground. And then
you talked there about sort of some quick exits. Do you think that's changing, out of curiosity? Because we had Simon Cook in your chair, and he was talking about sort of 5 to 7 year exits, and you're saying, you know, you had a few in a year and a half.
Yeah, I was surprised to hear that.
Yeah, is that something you see changing in the industry, where actually exits are happening quicker? Or
yeah, so I think there are different kinds of companies right now. So there are companies, especially in Europe, right? You know, if you're scaling, there are American companies interested in acquiring you to be, you know. So in the case of Luster, you know, Fab was growing. And now Fab, I think, does almost 35-40% of its revenue in Europe, and a lot of it's attributable to Luster. They also bought a German company, so the two combined. And
what do they do? I don't know, Fab or Luster.
So Fab sells boutique-y design goods that you would normally find at shops, like the independent shops, online. They initially started off flash sales, so it was, you know, one thing a day or a handful of things a day. They're now much more like a store. They built their first physical store in New York City. So I mean they're trying to build a design-led IKEA. Like some, you know, with boutique designers, but you know, with all the advantages that IKEA has, a low price, you know, availability, and when we looked at the market data, Europeans spend 3 times as much as Americans do on decorating their homes, both in terms of volume as well
3
as
times.
Yeah, it's
wow.
but think
that's because they know how to live.
Or they have smaller houses, and they have smaller houses. Is that per square foot?
But they have smaller houses. But think about it, Scandinavian design, you know,
Right.
You know, Italian design. Like, people care much more about their fit and finish in their home. So it's both volume as well as price per unit.
Wow.
So we looked at what Fab did. And by the way, Fab has a wonderful story, right? They started off as a gay social network called Fabulous.
Wow.
Didn't work. And one of the things that they did on their discussion forums was decide to sell some stuff. And they noticed that if they sold these design products, they stuck really well. And so they pivoted entirely, turned from Fabulous to Fab, and decided to become a design store.
That's awesome.
And their early users, 65,000 users, were their gay social network members. And then you know, it kind of grew from there. They have a few million people now using it. So Luster is doing the same exact thing. And when Fab was thinking about expansion, they bought Luster. So actually, they came to us with pretty much a gun to our heads, saying, "Look, either you sell to us, or we're going to come into the market." And you know, this is a big difference between American firms and European firms. They, in the course of about 8 months, I think, raised about $50 million.
Fab did.
Yeah.
Wow.
We, in the course of 8 months, raised £750,000. You know, this is totally different. So when they came in, they came knocking in England, so we're going to spend $1 million a month. You know, at that point, we were not spending anywhere close to those kinds of levels. And so the question was, do you sell to Fab, or do you then try and raise around and go head-to-head against them? And they made us an attractive enough offer that it made sense to sell
So
to
it was
them.
extortion.
But it is extortion, and that's exactly what you should do.
They will crush
right?
you otherwise.
Exactly. And it was a very entertaining conversation, because it was very polite, very diplomatic, but the message was pretty clear. It was either you sell or we compete. And we figured we probably had a 4 or 5 month head start, right? So even if they did want to compete, it would take them a while to be able to build the talent base, et cetera. So we're able to use that to our advantage, and there are a couple of other people interested in the company as well. So
you were talking about early exits. Sorry, just finish up on that.
Yeah, so you do see early exits like that. You also see early exits you see them less in Europe, but in the acqui-hire space. So, you know, a company builds something, they have phenomenally gifted engineers. You know, Facebook, Google, Twitter, et cetera, they're all looking for engineering talent. I mean, it is, you know, prices have gone up, the great people are great, you know, there's a huge hunt for talent. And because these companies are so desperate for great engineers, if they see a company that's struggling, that's probably not living up to where it wanted to be, but they've got exceptional talent, they're willing to acquire it. And so you see a lot of these early exits for that reason.
Just for the people.
Just for the people.
Wow.
And this, again,
and the tech as well, or the people?
It's usually the people.
Wow, that's wild.
Because the tech they can kind of rebuild, but the people, you know, the people are hard to find.
And they're paying like $500,000 for these people.
Usually
Probably
$1
more.
million to $1.5 million per person. And they only value the engineers. So, you know, if you've got 10 people and 2 people are like
Sales.
the business people.
Tell that to the sales guy. Yeah, exactly.
CEO. Nah.
Yeah, if the CEO's a coder, it's great. If the CEO's not, and they'll run engineering interviews on these kinds of guys.
Just to make sure.
To make sure that these are the folks that they want to hire in.
Why don't they just poach them?
It's hard.
You
if
think
you're
it'd
working
be cheaper. Like, you know, you show an engineer, you know, a lot of zeros.
Yeah, and you know, salaries in the valley have gotten inflated. But you know, usually if the startup's done a good job at recruiting, they've also done a good job at retaining these guys because these engineers are getting offers all the time.
So
I found out my old salary. So I was probably director level product manager. Back in the day, you'd earn somewhere between like 100 to 120K dollars. And it's a good salary. And if you got to a VP product manager, you'd probably earn 120 to 150K. Today, 400 to 600K. These are insanely high salaries, and there's a scarcity of talent. Wow. So there's a war for talent, so people will buy for talent.
Is that the big sort of debate in the U.S. about immigration? Just because they're keeping some immigration down, and if they open it up, maybe those salaries will go down.
All the tech companies want immigration doors to open because there's a scarcity. And because they want more people. So
the local engineers are picketing for immigration.
For non-immigration.
I want to keep my $400,000 salary. Thank you.
So the company keeps these engineers with equity stakes, but they don't have non-compete agreements usually with software engineers.
Non-competes are unenforceable, at least in California law. So you can't stop someone from working somewhere else.
Okay. So you keep them with their equity or whatever. Or the idea or the team. What is a master's in computer science out of Stanford making when they
straight out? 100, 120. So in the old days it used to be like 70 to 90.
Yeah. In the old days it used to be even less.
Yeah, maybe even less. Yeah, I think now it's probably 120, maybe even as high as 150.
So on par with, say, a business school.
Yeah.
And a lot cheaper.
Yeah.
Interesting. All right, we are.
Back to your timing question, just really quick to finish up on that.
Yeah.
To build the great companies, to build the things that turn it's 7 to 10 years.
Right.
People forget. Facebook started 2004. They went out on the public market 2012, right? That's 8 years. And Facebook feels like an instant phenomenon, right? It feels like it just happened overnight. Overnight was 8 years.
Yeah.
So the great companies still take a lot of time.
Billions still take a while, but the quick sort of.
The quick ones, and so you're getting this kind of bimodal distribution, right? Where you're getting the quick ones, which are the ones that are either not working or they're working well enough, but they could fit within someone else's home, and then the really great ones take a long time.
Yeah.
So.
We always like to ask a couple devil's advocate questions, so I got one. So I'm going to ask you about Hoxton Ventures. I mean, you guys have said some things on your site. You like the young, technical, first-time founders. And then I saw it said that you roll up your sleeves and help. And actually, Simon from DFJ was here, and he was talking about the time when I think Love Films warehouses burned down, and they all had to go in there to collect DVDs and stuff like that. And I was wondering, is it really true that you roll up your sleeves and help? And if so, give me an example.
Yeah, sure. So most of our helping we're a passive fund. So we have no desire whatsoever to run these companies or to tell the companies what to do or there's some venture investors, and oftentimes they're more private equity investors who consider themselves active, right? They like telling management what to do. We're dumb, right? We write you a check. You know the market way better than we do. All we can do is our rolling up the sleeves is making sure and facilitating intros and connections so that you can get to where you need to be 10 times faster. So if I'll give you an example. So we invest in this company. It's again another Erlang company in Sweden called Campania. They build a real-time bidding engine on top of Google. So they look second by second. It's actually every fourth bid. That's what Google's API allows you to do, to figure out if you're spending money on top of Google for advertising, whether it's positive yield or not so positive yield. And they're trying to maximize your yield. Their big reference customer now is Netflix. So they improve Netflix's spend on Google significantly, like in the double-digit percentages, which is huge.
So they're doing a real-time ROI on your advertising spend.
Yeah, so very similar to what a quantitative hedge fund would do in the markets, but doing this on non-advertising. So when we invested in them, one of the things that they really wanted to do is get close to Google. So we called one of our friends who happens to be one of the early angel investors in Google, Ram Shriram. He still sits on the board. He was the guy who wrote them a $250K check and walked away with $1 billion. Great investment for him. And so because Ram is, because of that, he's got money. And so we got him, we introduced him to Kamani, he got excited. So he ended up investing alongside of us. The other guy who invested was David Axmark, who founded MySQL. So among the three of us, we have a decent Rolodex. And so when Marcus, who's the CEO, and Marcus is, I think, 26, so he's a young guy, first-time founder, super, super, super bright. But, whenever he needs access to folks, he calls us up, and usually we can shortcut what would normally, and he'd be able to do it on his own. It just might take him like a week or two to track down the right guy on LinkedIn and meet so and so. But it's a lot easier when Ram, who sits on the board of Google, or us, pick up the phone and call up a Google exec or an exec in the Valley to say you really ought to meet Marcus and make that connection. So a lot of our business in terms of being active and rolling up our sleeves is that kind of stuff. But there have been instances where, sometimes we actually have product DNA. Now, our product DNA is a little bit, we're getting old and long in the tooth, and, we haven't been building companies recently because we've been investing. But, there's still some stuff that we know, right? So we know how we know how to optimize analytics sometimes. Probably don't know how to do this to the level of someone who worked at a Playfiish. But sometimes if you don't have a guy like that on your team, you can run those questions past us. So we've done this all the time with Tesaro, which has been building out its team. They come to us with questions like how to optimize conversion, and we can point them with pretty detailed. And Rob is much better at this than I am because Rob's been closer to building stuff than I am. Rob used to run the front end part of AdSense and Google, so he knows this super well. Yeah. But he can write very detailed stuff on how to do some of these things and pass it on. So, and if one of our companies calls us up and say, we're selling out of all of our boxes in Christmas, we need you out here in the warehouse, I think we'd cancel our vacations and go back in and put on the overalls and do that too.
Might be help to that.
Okay. All right, that's a good answer.
Yeah.
You got something for him?
Yeah, I guess, I think the whole VC world now is people, it just seems a lot more holistic and more for the entrepreneur. Do you think is that sort of just kind of smokescreen, or you really think like the VCs are changing and they're working far more with the entrepreneurs and not just for the quick exit and the quick returns, but are actually trying to grow billion-dollar companies and hang on to them for a long time? I think
it totally depends on every firm has a different strategy, and I think in Europe you probably don't see as many of the I'm shooting for the big outlier. Right. I think here. So one of the things that we explain to our investors, if someone came to us and said, look, you can invest in a company, put $1 million in, and I can guarantee that you will make 3 times your money. So you will not lose your money, and you will have a check for $3 million in, say, 5 years. We would turn that investment down if it has no potential for $1 billion outcome. So we're only interested in the things that can really be defined in categories. I would argue most of the venture community, at least in Europe, would take that bet. The reason why we don't do it is because if we have a bunch of those things in our portfolios, we have a limited amount of arrows in our quiver. Mm-hmm. If we have a bunch of 3Xs in our quiver, even if it's 3Xs, we will have failures and our fund returns will go down. So we're only shooting for the really large outcomes. As far as the entrepreneurial service, I think the industry is shifting, right? So the way we think about this is, the entrepreneurs are our customers, and then our shareholders are our investors. So we're in the business of making money for our shareholders. That's what we're supposed to do, but we only do that by empowering our entrepreneurs. Mm-hmm. So our entrepreneurs are our customers. We want to make those customers as happy as possible. How do you make them happy? You obviously write them a check. That helps them a lot, but that's sometimes not the only thing that needs to happen inside the company. So whatever problem they're facing, we want to be one of their first points of call to fix it for them, or to help them fix it. And the more we can do that, and there's some firms that have done a really admirable job on this stuff. Andreessen Horowitz is one, Social Plus Capital, Chamath's Fund is another one in the Valley, where they're actually building processes inside of the firm to be as not just entrepreneur friendly, but as entrepreneur service friendly as possible, right? So they have recruiters on staff, PR people on staff. We're a small fund. Mm-hmm. We can't do that. So, you get Rob and me, unfortunately, we can't have a payroll of folks. Andreessen Horowitz takes an approach where they're trying to be like CAA, Creative Arts Agency in Hollywood, right? Where if you're an actor or a producer or a director, right, it's a full service operation to make you as successful as possible, and CAA takes care of a lot of that stuff. We would love to do the same stuff, but to do that, you just have to be a much bigger fund. So probably something on our horizon. Now, I don't think every single firm is like that. There are still firms that look at entrepreneurs as the folks who are, making them money versus, the guys who are the stars and trying to make them shine. So, it totally depends. It totally depends on the attitude of the firm.
Yeah.
You could be anywhere. You could be in Silicon Valley. You could be in the alley in New York City. Why London? And everyone on this show, we talked about it, is that it doesn't have the big exits, doesn't have the number of IPOs. If anything, it's everyone talks. Okay, FinTech has potential. FinTech does, but do you find opportunity?
So, I came here accidentally, right? So I came here, I came here, I had a bad breakup. I didn't want to go back to Stanford. And so, when I applied to business school, there were a handful of places I could go. One of them was to go back to Stanford. Another one was to come all the way out to London. I had a bad breakup. It was with a Stanford girl. Didn't want to go back there. I moved out here, relocated. And then accidentally, Accel called me up and said, can you help out on the portfolio? And I joined the firm. And I basically, I mean, I kind of went to business school, but really most of the time I was working at Accel. And then I stayed at Accel for a couple of years after school. And I realized, the world was shifting in Europe. And if you look, you look at New York. New York had the same shift, right? But New York is a very vibrant tech economy right now. Lots of investors chasing after stuff. There are not that many investors chasing after stuff anywhere in Europe. It's a third the size of the market in the U.S. And I would argue the quality is going up and to the right in terms of people who can actually build these large businesses. And so I've been here for 8 years. I got permanent residency a year ago, so did Rob. Both of us ended up here almost accidentally. We both like the international aspect, but we both see it as huge market opportunity where they're not that, in terms of absolute numbers, there are not that many investors. In terms of relative investors, there are not that many investors who have deep connections to the Valley. Not that many folks who could pick up the phone and call up one of the Google board directors and facilitate an intro. We're fortunate because we both came from that ecosystem and we know these guys, so it's easier for us. And that's an advantage, and it's a service that most entrepreneurs here don't get. And there are not that many investors who are trained in the Silicon Valley way of building things, which is try and build something that can truly be great, right? If someone asks you, can you be a $1 billion company, you have an answer. Your next question should be, can you be a $10 billion company? Can you be a $100 billion company? Risk in the UK and risk in Europe is it's not understood the same way as it is in the Valley, where you're always shooting for something bigger and greater. So, I would argue we're both two Americans, kind of fish out of water, right? Maybe we should go back to America, and we probably could be reasonably successful out on the West Coast.
Gray squirrels.
We're gray squirrels. Sometimes we're annoying. Sometimes we're off-putting because not everyone thinks this way. We're brash. We're in your face. We're young. But there's a big market opportunity for the guys who are building these kinds of businesses. Again, we've been fortunate. They come to us and they like what we stand for. Not every single person does. So we're binary in that sense. But if you're going to try and build one of these things, I think we can actually offer something in this market. And I think this is a market that needs people like us. I would love to see another 4 or 5 folks like us, 4 or 5 firms like us, not even people like us, because that would revitalize this economy, right? We need more money. We need more of this attitude. The more of it that you get, the more of a community you get around it, and the bigger the entire thing gets. One of my biggest disappointments here still to this day, and I talk a lot about this, is I think employees don't get enough stock options. And this is a huge cultural difference between America and specifically the West Coast, not even the East Coast, the West Coast, where you create 20-25% option pool for your employees. And the reason why you do this as an investor, and the reason why you encourage it as an investor, is not so you can make as much money on that deal, because obviously you're going to dilute, right? You're going to give away a percentage of your company to employees. But those employees are going to go off, and most engineers are going to go off, and if they get rich, they're going to invest in other engineering stuff. They're going to invest in the next wave of startups. They're going to have some capital to go experiment. And that's how you get the YouTubes, right? The PayPal guys, the YouTube guys were not PayPal executives. They were like engineers at PayPal, but they made enough money to not have to worry about rent, which allowed them to go off and build something like YouTube, which turned out to be a great outcome. So you want to see wealth get recycled, and you want to take a very long-term view. I don't think there are enough people in Europe who have this kind of view. So I would imagine, I would argue that folks like us are in many ways necessary for the ecosystem here to get stronger. But I want more of us here, and that's hard given how bad the fundraising climate is for folks like us.
It's interesting. Simon said the same thing from DFJ.
Sure.
The last thing you would expect, a capitalist to want is competition. But I guess for you it expands the market.
It expands the market. I mean, it's hard work building these companies, right? And you need a collection of people around the table. You need the entrepreneurs, you need the executives, you need the engineers, and you need the money, right? So, it can't just be one person or 2 people or 5 people supporting the economy. It's much easier when there are 20 or 30 people.
I like your website. One of the things he says on there is, "We believe Silicon Valley matters." And, it's one short sentence, but it says a lot about your whole mantra.
I mean, we compare it, if you're going to build a financial company, you can be anywhere in the world today and trade, right? You can trade on a boat, right, if you wanted to. But, for connections and for knowing flow, you're probably going to be much more successful if you came out of London or New York. You could even come out of Dubai or Singapore, but it's probably not to the same level as New York or London, because that's where all the really smart people, that's where the major leagues are. That's where the Premier League is. So that's where you really want to be trained. Our industry, as much as it's getting global, and it's getting very global, very distributed, the center of our industries to this day is still Silicon Valley. So you want to be as plugged into that community as possible. The more plugged in you are, the more chances of success you have. You don't necessarily need to be there. I would argue in some cases you do, in some cases you don't, but you need to be plugged into that community. And that's why we think it matters so much. And there are not enough people in London or anywhere in Europe, I think, who are as well connected into that ecosystem as they should be. There's a little bit of a disconnect and a divide. It's shrinking, but there's still a little bit of a disconnect today.
It's wise stuff. All right, I'm going to hit him with the advice question.
Right.
Yeah, you ready?
Yeah.
Here we go. If you made a phone call up to the 20-year-old Hussein and you had to give him some advice, and it can't be to buy Apple stock or some nonsense, what would you tell him? What would you tell that kid?
Oh wow, that's hard.
Yeah, this is Silicon Real.
Yeah. So I mean, that's hard.
Bloomberg won't ask you these questions.
I took. I don't have very much regret in this, but one of the things is because I started up a company and because a lot of my life has been on this deferred plan. And I think you hear this a lot from entrepreneurs, right? You do something and you're spending all your time doing something with the expected, the payout and as well as like being able to do the next thing in your life kind of comes down in the future. Right? I'm going to work really hard on this. I'm going to ignore relationships. I'm going to ignore X, right? You can kind of see where I'm going with this.
Yeah. Ignore food. Ignore
food.
Clothes.
Exactly, because I'm going to go build something
Don't
really
shower.
big, and then once I get really big, I'm going to go on and I'm going to worry about all that other stuff, right? To the extent, and I think as you get older, you get a little bit wiser on this stuff, and you realize you can do a lot of these things at the same time. And you've gone to China and India, and you've built companies. I mean, you can integrate both of these two things in your life. And I think when I was in my 20s, I was definitely on the deferred life plan, and I would have encouraged my younger self to not be as deferred and to integrate some of this stuff much earlier in your life.
Does living in London make you think that even more? Because you're next to. In London, people announce their vacation plans. In the U.S., they keep them quiet. Obviously, on Europe, they take August off.
Right.
Do you think being here as a location also kind of allows you to appreciate there can be a work and life balance, and they both can help each other?
Yeah. I mean, I think people here do a better job than in the U.S. I mean, I think people on the continent do a better job. I think people here don't scale as much. I mean, they take out lower. They take out. If they see a certain thing, they go for the lower risk outcome. So I still think you can maintain, you can go for the big outcome, but you can be less deferred about your life, and you can find ways to integrate these two things in together. And there are lots of folks who become triathletes or run Ironmans or do whatever it is that they're passionate about and still run their companies at the same time, as opposed to putting stuff off. And maybe I'm doing this because I'm getting closer to 40, right? So I'm hitting my middle age at some point, and you realize after a while you put a lot of stuff on your deferred plan, and you really should be able to integrate it in with the way you're living life. So
yeah, I think it's part of the American mentality, maybe Canadian mentality, that if you choose to do something like a project and you're not putting 24 hours a day into it, then you're not really committed.
Right.
And this whole concept that you can maybe run a triathlon and it'll get your head in a better space, that you might be able to work better.
And more than that, if you take time away from whatever it is that you're doing, then you're putting whatever you're doing at risk, right? And these things are not as zero sum as you would imagine. And in fact, oftentimes they can be really quite additive, right? You can do both, and both end up rising, and both end up doing better, right? Because you're actually able to give yourself some of that space.
Yeah, definitely. All right, there's two more parts to the advice question. The second one is, what's the best advice you've ever received?
So the best advice I ever received was from Paul Sappho, who at the time was running something called the Institute for the Future, is now a prof at Stanford. He said, when you're choosing mentors, and this stuck with me for a long time, when you're choosing mentors, there are mentors that you will find that will want to see you succeed, but only to the level of their success. And there are other mentors that you will find that want to see you succeed to the maximum level, and they will never keep you back. So when you're choosing a mentor, find someone, where if you eclipse them and you become 100 times better than they do, they will be proud of the fact that they were mentoring you. And not everybody's wired to be this way. There are a lot of people in the world who will, look at you and say, I want that guy to succeed, but, only if he's a level below me, right? I'm the managing director. I want him to kind of be a little, a step behind me because, he's younger, et cetera. You want to find those people, and you want to surround yourself with the people who want you to grow to your maximum potential, whatever that potential is. And if you overshadow them, kudos, right? You got to play a part in their kind of success. And they're really hard people to find like that. And if you can find people like that, they're super valuable.
Not just mentors, even friends.
Yeah, I guess
girlfriends.
Yeah, exactly.
Employees.
Employees as well. Yeah.
Who are your mentors?
So Paul was one of them.
Okay.
I had great mentors when I was at Accel. I had a couple of great mentors. My old CEO, my second business, was a really good mentor. So they were great at pointing out stuff. So there's a group of people I can go back to and ask a bunch of questions. And one of the things in this fundraising journey, which was quite difficult, we made a bunch of kind of friends and supporters, who really, they just took an interest in the young guys who are trying to build a venture fund from scratch in a difficult economy, and went out of their way to make connections for us and to help us out, and for completely selfless motives, right? Just to succeed. And so you can intersect a bunch of these kinds of folks, but they're rare, and so
But that goodwill does exist out there.
Yeah, it does, and it's probably more prevalent in our industry than any other industry.
Yeah,
I think our industry is an industry which knows that supporting people, growing people leads to it works itself out in the long run.
It's a funny thing about mentors. As you get older, when you're young, you're like, oh, wow, it'd be great if that guy mentored me. I don't know why he's doing it because he doesn't get anything out of it. And when you get older, you see that 22-year-old who has a great idea, and you're like, I really want him to kill it.
Yeah.
And that really makes my life better. And I hope he just owns it, and like I can help him. And like I don't even need him to thank me later. I just need him to just do it.
Yep.
And that's just as important. When you get a bit older, that relationship can be.
And I find you can just see it better as you get older. You're like, I was that stupid 22-year-old, you know what I mean? Not thinking. Yeah. And you can just be like, no, don't do that.
There was an article on LinkedIn recently, and they said, don't find a mentor at a company, find someone that will champion you. Right. And that's what they said. And maybe it's a little bit about what you're saying. It's one thing to go and get that occasional piece of advice and to get patted on the head or whatever, but do you have someone who's in those meetings saying, you really should take a look at this kid. He's going places. Really give him the work. Give him this because he's the guy I'm putting my money on. Yeah. I mean, that's like a kind of a different person than maybe someone that's just giving you the advice.
Yeah.
So, all right, last part of the question is, there's a lot of people listening to this on iTunes, watching us on YouTube, and some of them are young entrepreneurs, or maybe they're at business school or at Stanford and they're 20 years old and they want to grow up one day and be part of one of these startups, or maybe they want to be a venture cap guy or something. What advice do you give them?
So the venture cap advice is one that we often get, right? Especially as one of the younger guys, you oftentimes get this question. The best training for venture capital, if you're going to do early stage, and late stage is a little bit different, then it's more financing. If you're going to do early stage, is learn how to build a company. Work for a company. So, all these business school guys who come and, knock on your door saying, I want to learn how to be an investor and, invest in it. Because it's a cool job in many ways, right? It's hard to run a fund. It's really hard to get fund returns, and you have to learn the fund part of the job. But, the real core part of the job is learning how to build companies. And the only training for learning how to build companies is being in a company, building a company. You can't go to McKinsey to learn this stuff. You can't go to Goldman to learn this stuff. They're great places and they're great training grounds for other things, but they're not training grounds for this stuff. And so then the question is finding a startup. And the best startup, and this is where it gets a little bit more precise, the best startup to join, and you have to have a very long view if you're going to work in this industry, right? So take a 10-year view. Don't try and get rich in 2 years or 3 years or not. Take a 10-year view. Almost everybody who I know is taking this advice and taking a 10-year view. Sometimes they hit it right out of the park the first time, sometimes it's the second time, sometimes it's the third time. Each one, there's usually a 3 or 4 year gap. But over the course of 10 years, they usually make it. So a bunch of my Stanford classmates have done very well. Some of them exceedingly well, but most of them have done pretty darn well.
7, 8-figure payouts, that kind of thing.
Yeah, usually 7 plus, sometimes 8 plus. Pretty well, but 10-year horizon, right? So you might not get it the first time, might not get it the second time. You'll get it the third time. But put yourself in a place where you're hyper connected in the industry. So not every single startup or not every single company that you join works alongside of its peers. Very good example. Microsoft's a very insular place. It does business with other Microsoft people. It has, obviously does business with Intel and now Nokia, et cetera, but it's an insular place. Where something like a Yahoo is very extroverted, right? It does deals and partnerships with people all across the industry. This is especially Yahoo in its early days. It was all partnership driven. So you want to be in a nexus of an industry which is very connected to other folks because you want to be able to transition at some point, and that's how you'll find your next opportunity. The more insular of a place you're in, the harder it is for you to be able to get to the next step, right? The more extroverted that company, the better. So that's one. And two is make your decisions on one really simple criteria. Be in environments where the people are going to challenge you, are going to be 10 times smarter than you. Put yourself in the teams and the groups where you're the dumbest guy on the team. Because the likelihood...
That's what I do here.
Hey, we're fighting for that spot.
Because the likelihood is, the guys who are around you are going to go off and do great things. So if you put yourself in these places where they're extroverted, those people who you're working with are probably going to jump ship And the likelihood is that's where your next lead is going to come from, and that's how you're going to position yourself for the next 10 years. And so, find the company that's connected in the industry and does business in the industry, and find a place, group, division, company, et cetera, whatever it is, where, again, the people there are rock stars. And they may not be rock stars at that moment in time, but they turn into rock stars. So a good example of this, so one of my closest friends at Stanford, so the first company he joined was a company called Amikai. It was a language translation company. It completely went bust. Most of that team today powers Google Translate. Rockstar guys, and that company had it was a terrible trajectory. It was lots of mistakes inside the company. It started in Japan versus in the U.S. Founder was a little nuts and kind of quirky. Lots of scars there, but the people were exceptionally talented, and they've all ended up in good spots. So that was a failure for him. Second business that he went to was he joined a team at Yahoo. Right, so hyper-connected company, but Yahoo was not a great company at the time relative to Google. But it was the team at Yahoo that was going to try and build a competitive product to Google. So what they did was they took all the rock stars at Yahoo and put them in one place, and he joined that team. So Jeff Weiner, who now runs LinkedIn, was on that team. Eckhard Walther is an entrepreneur in residence and now runs Cards. I think it's called Cardspace. Accel Partners was on that team. Ali Diab-Moran, VP of Product for AdMob, was on that team. Kevin was on that team. So Kevin joined that, and Yahoo fortunately had a good run. He made some money on the Yahoo stock and enabled him to buy a house, etc. But all those people scattered after a while, and have all ended up in great spots. Then he ended up joining IGN, which is a turnaround. It was a news site for video games. He became the VP of product there, made some money there. And then his fourth company he joined Zynga as a really early employee. And so you look at his 10 years, right? His first choice wasn't all that great, but he picked it on the basis of people. Number 2 worked out for him. Number 3 worked out for him. Number 4 really worked out for him. And now, he can pick and choose what he wants to do. And it's only, he's a couple of years younger than I am. It's only been about 10 or 15 years for him outside of school. So that's what I mean by taking a long view. And things work out. Don't stress about them, right? Because, again, you might not get it right the first or second time, but if you follow these 2 things, I think in general you'll do pretty well.
Solid advice.
Fantastic advice.
Very solid advice.
Yeah.
I think we could sit here and talk for hours, guys.
Jeez, I know.
But we're going to wrap this up. How do people get in touch with you if they want to? I don't know.
Super easy. Go to the website. There's an email button on there. The email button is info@Hoxton Ventures. It may look like a generic email. It goes to both Rob and I. We read all the emails. We'll respond. If you don't want to do that and you want to make it personal, you can just use my first name. It's Hussein, Hoxton Ventures. Otherwise, you can find me on Twitter, LinkedIn. You can probably find me on Facebook, although Facebook, my Facebook stuff is pretty closed because it's mostly for friends. But no, I'm out there. It's not that hard to find me and not that hard to contact me.
Okay, and that's hoxtonventures.com, right?
Yep.
And Twitter, you're at Kanji, Kanji.
That's right.
And awesome. I'm always surprised how accessible these VC guys are.
Yeah,
like Simon, I was like, "What's your email?" And he was like, "Simon@DFJ."
Yeah, exactly.
I was like,
it's our job, right?
Yeah.
So we don't come up with these ideas. People out there come up with the ideas, and it's our job to listen to them and then figure out what to do about them.
It's just, I think the whole business, since we don't bump into that many of you guys because there's not that many people.
Right.
That people kind of think you're up on the hills, you're gods, and you will be chosen, and you will be chosen, and I think that's why it's great to talk to you for like an hour and figure out what's going on inside your head because.
We're a service economy, right? So, again, maybe we have a little bit of a gate because we see so much stuff, but our job is to listen to the stuff that's coming in and then to back the stuff that's the most interesting. And oftentimes that stuff looks pretty raw, pretty new, but turns out, hopefully some of the things turn out to be great companies.
Awesome. Did I miss anything, Colin?
No, I think if we had lots of time, we didn't really even touch on BlackBerry or Microsoft or anything like that. But we
covered everything.
We got a drink about to get to. So.
Yeah, we got going to drink about right now. So we're going to the Silicon Drink About. Check that out. I think it's at Silicon DRK About or something on Twitter. That's it. If you're listening to us on iTunes and you want to see all of our beautiful looking faces, we're on YouTube channel right now, London Real TV. Also Silicon Real TV as well.
No, just
Silicon Real.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Twitter at Silicon Real. We want your suggestions for guests, and please hit us with that. What's the best way? Tweet at us, right?
Tweet's the best way, yeah.
Yeah, you're all over that Twitter.
I'm working on it.
Okay,
Yeah.
awesome. And yeah, that's it. Until that, we'll keep bringing you guys things every week. I think we're going to something on October 2nd at level 39. It's called Wine Meets Tech. It's being hosted by the Humble Grape. If you want to get in touch with that, it's at Humble Grape. It's a good friend of ours, James Dawson, over at level 39. He's hosting that, so you can get great views of Canary Wharf.
I think it's humblegrape.co.uk. You can check it out. And yeah, what's better than wine and cheese? I guess wine and tech.
Yeah, and tech. So yeah, we'll be there. Come check that out. It's on a Wednesday night. And there you go, guys. We say it's about the people here at Silicon Reel, and it truly is. So thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
Thank
It's great.
you. Yeah.
All right, guys, take care.
Like what you're doing and thought, you could apply it to their part of the business.
In this whole process, I'm just curious, how much is the technology and the business idea, and how much is the person behind it? I mean, that's why we do this show, to find out the people behind the tech, and a lot of people that have been here said they invest in people ultimately.